Welcome to the Masto Fitness Podcast. Today in episode 9, we are going to talk about how you can stay properly hydrated for all types of races. From 10-minute motos to 24-hour races, we'll talk about the things you can do to get the best out of your body hydration-wise. So this is a quick hit podcast, and we keep them short and to the point, focusing on the things you can do off the bike to race faster and safer. At Masto Fitness, we work with racers remotely in the real world. Many have a life full of commitments, don't have a ton of time to train, or a lot of time to ride. So we take the time they have off the bike and make the best of it with proper training that we do remotely. So whether you're riding or racing, whatever those days may be, we are going to have you racing faster and safer. So like I said, today we are going to talk about hydration and what you can do to be properly hydrated for all different durations and distances of races. But before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about hydration. So every cell, tissue, and organ in our body needs water to properly function. For example, our body uses water to maintain our temperature, remove waste, lubricate our joints, and help get blood to working muscles. Our body is about 60% water. That's for males. For women, it's a little bit less, 55%. So no matter what, though, the point is we're a lot of water, and water is a key function to helping our body properly operate. And when we want it to perform, that water is even more vital. So when you exercise, for example, your body sweats as it tries to return our body to an optimal temperature. As sweat evaporates from our skin, it helps remove heat from the body. But through that process, we also lose fluid. So that's where hydration comes into play. We need to be drinking fluid before, during, and after exercise to replace that fluid we lose through sweat. So simply put, our body's working a lot when we're racing or riding, keeping muscles working, our organs function, our heart pumping to get working muscles the fresh oxygen they need. And then on top of that, our body is sweating to try to cool itself. So there's a lot going on, and that hydration is super important. Now, how do you find out how much fluid you need to have? Simply put, you need to take a sweat test. And what this is a test where essentially the most basic form is you weigh yourself, you go exercise or race, and then you weigh yourself after. And then there's a calculation that we do to figure out how much fluid we lost, and that's fluid we lost through sweat. Now, first, there's a couple factors here. If you went to the bathroom during that time you were working out, you took in fluid during that time, or took in any food during that time, those are all factors with a sweat rate, and it can be calculated in a sweat rate. So actually at Masto Fitness, all of our racers have a sweat rate test guide that lays out how to do the sweat test, the type of parameters we want to have, and then a calculator so they find their sweat rate. And the things like taking in fluid, going to the bathroom can all be factored into that. But my simplest answer for you, if you're going to do a sweat rate test, just try not to go to the bathroom during it. That makes it the simplest. Oftentimes you can just simplest way to do it is to do an hour test. If you have any fluid, make sure you're just measuring it and you know how much you took in, and that makes the calculation a whole lot easier. So first, that's a sweat test, because a sweat test can vary so much from different athlete to athlete. Me, for example, I need about 35 ounces of fluid an hour. Another racer, they could use 45 ounces. Another racer could use 20 ounces. It can be all over. It's very individualized. So you can't really go off any generic number. You can't go off what someone else is doing. You got to find out your specific numbers for a sweat rate test. And then to kind of take it one step further, when we're racing in different environments, our sweat rate can vary. Hot environments, cold environments, really humid environments, sweat rate can change. So kind of doing sweat rates throughout the race season is a good idea, something I always suggest, because kind of helps you understand your body and your needs and make sure you're not cutting it too close. So like I said, at Masto Fitness, our racers have a sweat rate guide all racers have access to. And then on top of that, they also have a hydration guide and race day fueling guide. So we've got the figuring out what we're losing and figuring out what we need to take in covered at Masto Fitness. So we've got that out of the way. We know what a sweat rate test, the basics of it, how it's really individualized for every racer, and how environments make a difference. So there we go. So let's talk about what we can do to stay and be properly hydrated for all types of events. Now, first, we need to come in properly hydrated. There's nothing we can do on race day to essentially hydrate ourselves. I think for me, the best analogy was my high school experience and college experience were completely different. So when I was in high school, I was probably not the best student in terms of caring about school. And so I never studied. And then the day before, or more than likely the morning of, I would look at the information and be like, oh yeah, I'll memorize this magically right now and I'll get it figured out. Take the test. Never worked a single time. Then post high school, went to college actually a couple years later, but whatever. Little lapse there. Then I went to college and I got interested in exercise science. It's really interesting, something I really enjoyed, and I wanted to do well. So I would study the material in the days leading up, not just the morning of or the night before. I would take the information bit by bit as the days led up and work on it, study it, and help my mind absorb it. Now, hydration is the same way. Race morning, we can't just pound a gallon of water and be hydrated. That's not the way it works. We need that kind of trickle effect. So we want to look 48 hours, 72 hours out and look at hydration and start hydrating for race day, race weekend. And this doesn't matter if you're doing short motos, 1 or 2 classes, or a sprint enduro, or if you're doing a 24-hour event. For me, I think hydration needs to be the same no matter what. We want our body topped off and not overfilled, because that's going to have it at its optimal performance level. So back up those 48 hours, 72 hours out, start actively drinking fluid. It doesn't, we don't want to overhydrate ourselves, which can be done. And when we overhydrate ourselves, essentially, we start to dilute the minerals in our body, which we're going to talk more about next week. So we want to be properly hydrated and getting in an amount that's going to have us at like a light amber pee. That's a good place to be. We don't want a clear pee. That's too diluted. We don't want a really dark pee. That's definitely not hydrated at all. I'm sure many of us have finished a race and peed a couple hours after the race and we're like, whoa, that's really dark, way too dehydrated. So before the race, we do not want that. We want that light amber. So think about that. In those days leading up, you're getting in a proper amount of fluid, you're staying hydrated. And the closer we get to race day, we're just topping off that fluid. And then we get to race morning. And like I said, just like me in high school, can't absorb all that information. Same with hydration. We're just keeping it topped off. So race morning, you don't really need a ton of fluid. You just need enough to keep everything topped off. For me, for example, if I'm racing at noon, I'm probably having maybe 30 ounces of fluid race morning if it's not too hot. And it's just enough that I got to pee a bit, keeping that light amber pee, but I'm not like peeing all the time, peeing super clear because that's too hydrated. So I've kind of kept everything smooth and filling up as the race got closer and closer. And then race day, I'm just doing that little bit of top off. So keep that in mind no matter what type of racing you're doing. That's really important. It's all in those days leading up. So now let's go ahead and look at the shorter end of races. Talking about motocross, sprint enduro, where you're doing quick, super intense motos. So for this, that proper hydration coming into it is key. And then we finish race 1 and there's another race coming up. So we want to help our body recover from race 1 and get ready for race 2. So my suggestion is you want to get in about 10 to 20 ounces. Now this is a really, really general, but you definitely want to take something in and get it in pretty quickly once you get off the bike, because we want to start our body being able to recover from the previous race and get ready for our next race. So keep that in mind. 10 to 20 ounces, not to be anything crazy. Like I said, sweat rate, so important for you to figure out. Like if you're doing a sprint enduro or a moto, easiest thing, just have a scale with you at the track. Hop on that scale with just your riding gear, everything on. Check that weight. Go out and do the moto. As soon as you hop off your bike before you get anything in, check that weight again. And that'll be a good way to understand how much fluid you lost. And you can kind of gauge how much you need to get back in before your next moto. Now, obviously, there's always limits to things like this. The duration from Moto 1 to Moto 2, or sprint enduro Moto 3 to 4, or maybe you're racing 2 classes. The duration of those, how much fluid can you get in that amount of time? What's realistic for you to have given yourself something but not feel bloated? Those are all factors, but simply put, we want to get something in after those motos and get after it pretty quickly. Now let's go to the next duration of racing. Let's go to hare scrambles and enduros. This is where fueling is just a big factor. And this can happen in motocross as well, or sprint enduros, but it's less likely to happen. Much more likely to happen in what I'm going to talk about now and then 24-hour races. And that is when we lose a certain amount of fluid and we're not going to be able to get it back. So before I go into how I would suggest you fuel in terms of hydration for a hare scramble and enduro, it's important to remember these two numbers, 2% and 4%. When we lose 2% of our body weight, we start to lose our peak performance. So essentially, we're not able to perform as high of a level as we were, not able to get as high of a heart rate, quicker reaction, we're not feeling as sharp. Once we lose 4% of our body weight, that's like a no going back. I'm sure many of you have maybe just been flipping through over the years and seen like the Ironman World Championships maybe in Hawaii. You see like people like crawling, people like kind of weaving all over the road, running in the dark, and people that look like they've just kind of lost it. That's when you get past 4%. That's a pretty dangerous place to be. And for us as racers, dirt bike racers, what that means when we hit 4%, there's no coming back. We're going to have to slow way up. We're not going to be able to race as fast, and we're going to just kind of have our tongue in our spokes before we get to the finish line. We're going to have to just really cut it back. So with those two things in mind, for longer endurance events like a hare scramble or enduro, start hydrating early and hydrate often. This is what's really going to help you with your success for the day, because over that duration of a hare scramble, 2-hour, 3-hour race, or an enduro, multiple hours with breaks, we're not going to be able to get in enough fluid, especially on a warm day, to replace everything we're losing. So it's like a war of attrition. And we don't want to start fueling too late. If we start waiting for an hour or 90 minutes to get in some hydration, well, it's too late because our body can only absorb so much fluid at a time. So think about that. Start hydrating early, start hydrating often. That's going to make the difference of you being able to get the most out of your body. I know I'm out there racing these off-road events, and you get in those situations where the course gets jammed up, or you get behind someone who you're trying to get around, or what a million things happen where you kind of you're not up to like race speed. That's those perfect opportunities to get in fluid. And they happen right from the beginning of the race, no matter what class you're in. So think about that. Make sure you're grabbing that hydrator, getting some fluid in, because once we get to 2%, not going to be performing. Once we get to 4%, game over. We're just going to be coasting to the finish line, and none of us want that. So that's what I suggest for hare scramble or enduro. Now, extreme endurance events, I'm talking like 24-hour races. You're racing like the Ironman class, I think is what they call it. You're out there like the whole time, or you're on like a 2-man team. So you're like essentially racing 12 hours over the course of 24 hours. Hydration is just going to be huge, because once we get, like I just said, that 2% or 4%, it's game over. If you get that dehydrated in the first couple hours or half day of one of these events, you're just going to be extreme suffering. So either you're not going to be having fun. And we know these 24-hour races are a ton of work in terms of planning, getting there, this time spent at the race, getting ready, all the logistics. The last thing you want to do is mess up on a hydration strategy when you could have an awesome day thanks to a good hydration strategy. So make sure you are hydrating right from the beginning, and you're really staying on top of it. Like you have a fueling schedule. Each lap I need to get in this much, or each hour or 2 hours I need to get in this much. And really, for these extreme endurance events, what I suggest is you need to be peeing. You need to be peeing often. You can pee while you race or not. That's up to you. But you want to be peeing often, especially the first half or more of that race, because we want to try to get that even fluid balance. We want to stay way away from that 2%. So if we're able to pee a light amber, a good portion of that race, that's going to put us in a really good spot, because once we get behind, it's going to be really hard, pretty much near impossible to catch up in those 24-hour races. Even though intensity is a little bit down when you're on like a solo or a 2-man team, your heart rate still, we need to get everything out of it. What I'm saying is with that lower heart rate is the body can digest and use fluid and get food in a little bit easier. So it's important to make sure you're getting in that fluid. But if you don't take advantage of that, I think that's where it's really going to sneak up on you and hurt you really bad in the back end. And you're going to be feeling miserable those last couple hours, which a 24-hour race already, we're going to be probably feeling pretty miserable. And so why don't we just limit it with having proper hydration? At least we know we nailed that one. So that's what I would suggest for a 24-hour race. You really want to be peeing, and you want to be keeping it as even as you could. So like I said, if you want to better understand your sweat rate, just take a scale with you. Weigh yourself before and after. If you're racing a hare scramble, it can be really simple that you know how many ounces in your hydrator, you drank all of that, you weigh yourself before and after with the calculation of that fluid. If you had a little bit of like solid at the rest stop, you can calculate that weight into the sweat rate, figure out what's going on. When you go practice, if you're going and doing motos, take a scale with you. You'll get a lot of insight to your body and learn what you're losing. And like I said, sweat rate testing is something that's really, really valuable, something we have for all of our racers. So because fluid is just such a big one. And when the temperatures gets warmer, when the races get longer, that sweat rate and that fluid need just becomes so much more important. And those can just be separators of the competition. And we want to give our racers all the advantage they have. Now, today I talked just about hydration. I didn't go into sports drinks or sodium. So next week, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go deeper into sports drinks, sodium, and the things that you can take in to help your body better use fluid and give you energy. So we'll go deeper into that next week. Now, Mosto Fitness. If you want to try it out, you want to see what it's about. It's a remote online coaching program, tons of resources, really cool ways to interact with me and with other racers. If you want to try it out, see what it's all about, send me a message on Instagram and we'll hook you up with a week of the single jump training program. See you guys next week.